Today we're out here in the rain taking a look at the all-new 2019 Subaru Crosstrek plug-in hybrid. This is the first ever Subaru plug-in hybrid in the United States and their second attempt at bringing a hybrid Crosstrek to our shores. Some of you may recall that we had a first drive video on the Crosstrek plug-in hybrid down in Malibu, but in this video we're going to be taking a more detailed look at the vehicle because we've had it for a complete week and we've been out here in the Santa Cruz Mountains where it has been absolutely pouring all week long. The perfect climate to test a Subaru and, of course, Subaru's first plug-in. The Crosstrek has two main missions in America: to be the most efficient Subaru on sale in this country and to be the top-end trim of their popular Crosstrek. And that's why we see features standard on this model that we see optional on other versions of the Crosstrek, like the adaptive LED headlamps you steer in the corners. We also have LED fog lamps down below. Other than that, and the optional bright blue paint that our particular model has, this looks like any other Subaru Crosstrek out there. The non-hybrid Crosstrek is targeted directly at things like the Chevy Trax, the Honda HR-V, the Jeep Renegade, etc. But when you look at the side profile, you'll notice that there's something very different going on here. This really is just a lifted up, off-roadified version of the Impreza hatchback. So the overall shapes are the same as the Impreza hatchback, and the overall length is basically the same as well, at over 175 inches long. This is 9 inches longer than a Jeep Renegade, and really only about 5 inches away from something like a Toyota RAV4. So in terms of overall size, this is actually closer to many compact crossovers than the average subcompact crossover in America. But the Crosstrek in regular gasoline form is priced more like the HR-V than the CR-V. Of course, we're here to talk about the plug-in hybrid Crosstrek, and this introduces a slightly different set of comparisons because the plug-in hybrid system definitely raises costs up from what we see in the non-hybrid model, putting this in theoretical direct competition to new entries like the RAV4 hybrid. Aside from the go-anywhere cladding, the biggest change you'll notice between the Impreza and the Crosstrek is the overall ride height. At 8.7 inches off the ground, this has Jeep Grand Cherokee-like ground clearance, very much like we see actually in the rest of the Subaru lineup, and very different than we see in many of the subcompact or even compact crossovers in America. The new Toyota RAV4 hybrid is now a little bit higher off the ground than the last model, but something like the HR-V, the Trax, the CX-3, etc., they're an awful lot closer to the ground. Moving to the rear, we again don't find many changes versus the regular model. We have combination LED tail lamp modules, which means that the brake lights and the parking lights you see are LEDs, but the backup lights and turn signals are incandescent bulbs. And then down here we just have reflectors. Subaru has really been focusing on active safety lately, and that's why all plug-in versions of the Crosstrek will have the EyeSight safety system standard. That gives us adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, and then we also have blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic detection. This safety system is named EyeSight because it uses two optical cameras right here behind the windshield to perform most of the system functions, including the adaptive cruise control function. So there's no radar sensor in the front of the vehicle. Everything is done optically back there. There are definitely some pros and cons to this type of system. The first pro is that it's less expensive, both to purchase and, of course, to maintain, because if you get into a minor fender bender or if you're off-roading and you bash something into the front of the car, you don't have to worry about a radar sensor getting damaged because the cameras are doing all that work for you. On the flip side, if your windscreen is a little bit icy right up top in that area right there, if you haven't scraped it completely or if it's a little foggy, then the system can't see what's going on in front of you and it won't function. That's an important thing to keep in mind if you do drive in an area where you get frost. You actually do have to clean the areas right here behind this camera and the one over there on the passenger side in order for the system to function properly. Under the hood of the Crosstrek in America, we find a 2-liter 4-cylinder boxer engine, regardless of the version that you choose. In the non-hybrid model, it produces 152 horsepower. Power goes down in the hybrid because of the tweaks they did to the engine in order to improve overall efficiency. The non-hybrid model gets either a 6-speed manual or a continuously variable transmission, but things are very different under this hood right here. This hybrid system is actually very similar to what we see in certain Lexus models. It's a longitudinal 2-motor system. The similarities between this system and the Toyota and Lexus systems are not coincidental. Toyota owns a minority share in Subaru's parent company, and they've worked together on a number of projects in the past. So when Subaru wanted to create a new plug-in hybrid vehicle, they went over to the Toyota parts bin and they were able to access certain components and then design their own transmission and their own drivetrain systems around them. So this uses the same electric motors that we find in the Camry hybrid and the same battery pack in the rear that we find in the Prius Prime plug-in. Using those basic components, Subaru created a unique drivetrain that is true to their brand's values. This uses a true mechanical all-wheel drive system, and that's a pretty big differentiator between this and the RAV4, which uses an electric axle in the back. The Crosstrek plug-in hybrid is just as capable off-road, if not actually more capable because of the extra torque, than the regular version of the Crosstrek. And that's very different in the RAV4, where the hybrid is definitely less capable than the non-hybrid model. Overall horsepower comes in at 148 total, which does seem below the regular model, but actual performance ends up being better because we have a lot more torque out of this system. Now, Subaru, like Toyota, does not give us a total torque number, but I suspect this is probably somewhere around 200 pound-feet total. Charging happens via this door right back here on the driver's side. We have an onboard 3.3 kilowatt charger that will charge the battery from 0 to completely full in about 2 hours if you have access to 240 volts. The battery's nominal capacity is 8.8 kilowatt hours, but they haven't given us an official actual capacity. I suspect it's somewhere around 7 kilowatt hours. Very much like we see in the Toyota plug-in hybrid models, they're reserving a bit of capacity on either end in order to improve overall battery life. The battery is right back here in the cargo compartment. When the battery is completely charged, this is good for 17 miles of EV-only range, up to speeds of about 64 to 65 miles an hour. So if you do drive at higher speeds, you should know that this will not drive in EV-only mode at those higher speeds, just like most plug-in hybrids out there. Because of the battery's position, the cargo area shrinks versus the regular Crosstrek. It goes from 20.8 cubic feet down to 15.9. It is a noticeable reduction. And in our 24-inch roller bag test, that meant that we fit one less 24-inch roller bag back here. It also means that 22-inch roller bags like this is the largest size you can carry onto a domestic flight in the US, will fit like this just barely under the cargo cover. That's about the tallest thing you can put back here and still have that cargo cover in place. Due to the overall design of the battery pack, this cargo area has an unusual hump over here on the passenger side. I'm not entirely clear what that's for, but it is part of the pack itself. We have a small storage area right here. If we flip up this back section, you could put the charge cable back here. We also have our can affixed to flat and a tow hook. I haven't been able to get confirmation from Subaru about this, but when you take a look at the technical drawings and exploded drawings of the Crosstrek's battery, it appears that the spare tire well is actually still right there under the battery. So unfortunately, it is a little bit of wasted space down there because we don't have a spare tire, and the spare tire well, although not occupied, is completely obstructed by the battery. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give this 9 out of 10 points for the subcompact segment. If you were to compare this to something like the RAV4, then I would drop this down to 8 out of 10 points because the compact segment has seats that are slightly more comfortable. One key thing to know about the Crosstrek is that the seating position is definitely more car-like because of this vehicle's origins as an Impreza hatchback. So if that's something that you're after, this is definitely going to be the vehicle for you. Personally, I do like the combination of high ride height and a slightly more relaxed seating position. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and a powered driver's seat, but we don't have any adjustable lumbar support. The main benefit to this being based on a compact vehicle is the overall interior room, because this is definitely roomier than the average subcompact crossover in America. We have several inches more combined legroom than most of the entries, although the Honda HR-V does beat this by a hair. It's really noticeable sitting behind myself, where I have about 4 or 5 inches of legroom left. Definitely more than we'd find in something like a CX-3 or the Jeep Renegade. Overall headroom is pretty good back here. My hair is brushing the ceiling, but it's not touching the ceiling. I have about ½ an inch of headroom left. Again, better than we find in some of those subcompact crossovers, again, like the CX-3. It's also noticeable if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, I still have about an inch of headroom left. If I sit in the middle seat, the other advantage becomes immediately clear, and that is the overall width of the rear passenger area. This is wider than the average subcompact crossover, so again, definitely roomy for larger people back here, or 3 people if you need to do that. Moving to the inside, you can see the eyesight cameras right there above the rear view mirror. This is also where Subaru puts the controls for the system. Lane keeping disabled button right over here, collision warning and mitigation system off, along with the SOS button for the telematics system and the controls for the sunroof. The sunroof is a pretty standard sized model, goes right there to the driver and front passengers' heads. We have 4-way adjustable ratchet style headrests, those ratchet forward right like that, and then height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. These are 2 features we don't typically find in a lot of other subcompact vehicles. The upholstery is 2-tone leather. The center section is a dark navy blue, and then we have this sort of bluish gray lighter section on the outside, and then lighter blue stitching to complement everything. The seats are fairly aggressively bolstered, which was a little bit of a surprise, but one that I like, and the seat bottom and back feature perforations in the center section, but these seats are just heated, they're not actively ventilated. Moving over to the doors, we find overall parts quality that definitely exceeds the average subcompact crossover in America, so we definitely find more hard plastics, for instance, on the doors of the Toyota CHR. Again, that's due to the origins of the Crosstrek. Moving in for a closer look, we have a soft touch upper section, soft touch perforated insert right there, some faux carbon fiber around the door release, and then this attractive blue trim on the doors that continues on over to the dashboard. We also have some contrasting stitching on the soft touch upper section of the dashboard that matches what was going on the seats, and then a fairly typically sized glove compartment. I was able to fit a larger iPad in there without a problem. Thinking out loud here for a moment, wouldn't it be cool if you could buy a car like the Crosstrek and then get different colored inserts for these sections? If they were easily user removable and replaceable, and the manufacturer sold a variety of different colored parts, wouldn't that be kind of nifty? Also, let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we have a small LCD on the upper section right there. We see that in a lot of other Subaru models that has a variety of different readouts, from the weather, pulled from XM satellite data, the location if you're in the navigation, Apple CarPlay readouts, fuel economy, etc. We also have the status of the vehicle's plug-in hybrid system. Right now it's in charge mode. As we're sitting here, I can turn it into hold mode, etc. And when you're driving in EV mode, it would show the power flow, just like a pretty typical hybrid. Below that, we find the standard touchscreen infotainment system. If you get the regular versions of the Crosstrek, then there are smaller screens available, but the plug-in just has the one that we're seeing right here. It features smartphone integration, as you can see right there. We also have a factory mapping interface with XM satellite traffic data. We click over to the apps option. We have all these latest integrated apps, from streaming media to the My Subaru app, where you can request roadside assistance or make an appointment for service right there within the head unit. Below the infotainment system, we find the engine start-stop button over there to the left and the single-zone automatic climate control below the screen. Below the climate controls, we have a storage cubby, and then we have a pretty typical console shifter. We have drive down here, and then B1 mode back. B is basically the same as what we find in other hybrids out there. It's an increased braking mode using a combination of engine braking and regenerative braking, depending on exactly what's going on with the battery. Speaking of the battery, there's a button with the battery icon on it right here that allows us to change the behavior of the plug-in hybrid system. We can have it hold the battery charge for later. We can have it charge the battery so that way you can use EV driving later, or we could put it into normal mode where it will make choices based on exactly what you're asking of the drivetrain. We have an X mode button. This performs the same feature that it does in any other Subaru model. It engages the hill descent control and helps prepare the all-wheel drive system for slightly more rugged duty. We have an electric parking brake right here, and then the controls for the heated front seats. Working our way back, we have two cup holders right there. I had no problem fitting larger takeout drinks, and then a softly padded center armrest. You'll notice the armrest is navy blue, just like the trims on the seats right here, but the center console is charcoal. I really like the colors going on inside this interior. I kind of wish that this was an option in the regular Crosstrek, actually. If we open this up, we have two USB inputs for that smartphone integration right there, a 12-volt power port, auxiliary input, and a reasonable amount of storage space. The only major change versus the non-hybrid model is that we have a power charge gauge right over here on the left instead of the tachometer. Now, one thing that I dislike about this is that there's no real indication about where the EV mode will end based on your throttle application. I wish that this display would give you that indication so that it would be easier to stay in EV mode if that's something that you were really interested in. We have the same speedometer over here on the right, and then a color multifunction display in the middle. That's controlled via some buttons on the steering wheel and allows us to toggle through things like our trip computer information, tire pressure readouts, digital speedometer, etc. The steering wheel is a leather-wrapped 3-spoke design with sport grips up top. I wish this had some regen paddles on the back like we're starting to see in other EVs and plug-in hybrid models. On the left side of the wheel, we have the buttons for the infotainment system. The info button over here controls the multifunction display that we saw above the infotainment system. And then these toggles down here, these 3 buttons, actually control the multifunction display between the power gauge and the speedometer. You can see that changing right there. On the right side of the wheel, we have the buttons that control the adaptive cruise control system, a button to turn on and off the lane keeping system. And then these 2 buttons change the way the throttle mapping works. We have intelligent and we have sharp mode, just like we see in other Subaru models. Out on the road, this is actually faster than I thought it would be based on our initial experience out in Malibu. 0 to 60 happened in our testing in 8.35 seconds. That is significantly faster than the non-hybrid Crosstrek, which takes 9.5 seconds to accomplish the same task. How is that possible when the hybrid produces fewer horsepower than the non-hybrid model? Well, it all has to do with the way the power is applied and, of course, the added torque from the electric motor. We don't have an official torque specification, as I said before, but this motor definitely is producing a great deal of torque, and that really helps out the at least initial acceleration. When we're taking a look at 0 to 30 times, that's where the big difference between this and the non-hybrid model happens. It's about a full second faster in that initial 0 to 30 run. Because of this overall system design, we get a lot of low-end torque, and then we have that EV ability as well. Speaking of the EV ability, EV mode tops out at around 64-65 miles an hour, and there is no real indication on the instrument cluster about when that is going to happen. You're just going to experience it eventually. The battery pack is reasonably powerful, so we have no problem hill climbing in EV mode as long as you keep the throttle under control. But on the downside, when it comes to EV mode operation, if you do end up in a situation where you're leaving home, you hop immediately on the interstate, you set the cruise control to 72 miles an hour, then it's going to take about 30 to 35 miles for you to completely exhaust the battery pack, not 17, because the vehicle has to turn on the engine due to the overall hybrid system design. This is not designed quite like a Chevy Volt. And in those situations, even though the vehicle is pulling power from the battery pack, it's not pulling the majority of the energy from the battery pack to drive the car forward. Getting back to the numbers, in our braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 118 feet. That surprised me quite a lot, actually, because we have the same size tires in this that we have in the non-hybrid Crosstrek, but this stops significantly shorter. The big difference is in weight, I think, because this is about 600 pounds heavier than the non-hybrid model, and a lot of that weight happens right back there behind me. When it comes to our overall handling score, I'm going to give this a B-, basically the same score that we see in the non-hybrid Crosstrek. Even though this is heavier and has the same size tires, they've moved a lot of the weight to the rear of the vehicle, and that actually helps balance out the overall handling feel. Subaru models generally tend to be a little bit more front-heavy than some of the competition because the entire engine is in front of the front axle. And by having the added weight of the battery pack in the rear, it helps cancel that out and make this a little bit more balanced. It's definitely noticeable in neutral handling situations where this doesn't feel quite as front-heavy as the regular Crosstrek. Now, all versions of the Crosstrek are still fairly softly sprung, so this is not exactly going to be the canyon carver that the Mazda CX-3 is. Out on a rougher gravel road like this, the softer suspension we find in the Crosstrek is instantly noticeable, especially versus entries like the Mazda CX-3. This is going to be an awful lot more comfortable whether you're going off the beaten path like this, or whether you're taking this on a longer highway journey and you have to deal with freeway expansion joints, etc. The other thing you'll really notice when you get off on a road surface like this is the true mechanical all-wheel drive system. For instance, if I were to stop right here, and then just floor the vehicle, we get instant traction, equal traction on all 4 tires, and that's not what we get in the Toyota RAV4. In the RAV4 hybrid, we get a lot of front wheel scrabble, and then we get a gradual progression of a little bit of power to the rear, because it just has that electric motor in the rear and no way to send even half of the engine power to that rear axle. So this is going to feel an awful lot more sure-footed in those situations. And that would also apply to ice, snow, mud, any of those kind of inclement weather conditions. Although the X-Mode system does not command a complete locking of the center coupling like we do find in some crossovers out there, this is still going to be very, very capable in the snow. A lot of people have asked me whether Subarus are the best in the snow versus other vehicles out there. I would say they're not necessarily the best, but they're definitely among the best because of the all-wheel drive system. Generally speaking, vehicles that can completely lock the center coupling are going to be able to get you out of stickier situations, and we can't do that in the Crosstrek, whether we're talking about the hybrid or the non-hybrid. But this vehicle can send a decent amount of power to the rear, and the overall system is definitely designed for those adverse situations. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, this cabin came in at 73 decibels, exactly the same score that we got in the non-hybrid model. When it comes to overall cabin noise, a definite difference between this and the non-hybrid model are the hybrid noises that we hear from the drivetrain. You can definitely hear the electric motor whine when you're accelerating in EV mode, and you can also hear the whine of the electric motors and the overall drivetrain systems under there when you're regen braking. So there are definitely some different sounds going on in this cabin. I don't find them particularly obtrusive, and they're very, very similar to what we see in Toyota's hybrid systems, but we don't see the same sort of noises in some of the other hybrids out there, like Honda's hybrid systems. They're definitely a little bit quieter. Now let's tackle fuel economy, the entire reason that we have a hybrid system in the first place. If you treat the Crosstrek just like a regular hybrid vehicle and you never plug it in, then you're going to get about 35 to 36 miles per gallon in our tests. That's about 5 miles per gallon overall better than we see in the non-hybrid Crosstrek, which did exceed its EPA scores in our real-world testing. But if you want better fuel economy than this, you will actually find it in some of the other options out there, like the upcoming RAV4 hybrid, although it's not going to have the plug-in ability and it's not going to be quite as capable off-road as this. If, on the other hand, you plug the Crosstrek in, then you could get overall fuel economy averages between 45 and 50 miles per gallon overall, using a mixture of gasoline and the electricity, of course. It's important to remember that at the speeds that most Americans drive out on the interstate, you're not going to be able to stay in EV mode. So if you do live out in the country and you're spending a lot of time on rural country roads, you may actually get a better overall economy score than if you were driving this in a more urban environment. When it comes to pure EV efficiency, this score is 90 on the EPA's MPGe scale, which makes this one of the least efficient overall electric vehicles in America. The main reason for that is the mechanical all-wheel drive system, part of what makes this so capable off-road. So there are definitely some trade-offs in order to have that off-road ability. The combination of the plug-in hybrid system and a mechanical all-wheel drive system is what makes the Crosstrek so unique in America, because outside of this, you would have to move up into a luxury vehicle if you wanted that combination. Something like a BMW plug-in hybrid would offer all-wheel drive and the plug-in hybrid ability, but nothing else in this segment really will. Speaking of the EV ability, EV mode tops out at around 64-65 miles an hour, and there is no real indication on the instrument cluster about when that is going to happen. You're just going to experience it eventually. Before we dive into pricing, we should talk about availability, because that is a key component for the Crosstrek plug-in hybrid. Subaru is not going to be selling this in every state in the United States. So if you want a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid and you live, say, in Texas, your options are going to be more limited. At least initially, Subaru says that they're only going to be selling it in the following states: California, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Basically California and the other 9 states that follow California's ZEV rules. If you live outside of those states, you won't find the plug-in hybrid model on your local dealer lot. However, you may be able to get it serviced if you were to buy one and then drive it back home. We haven't received official confirmation from Subaru yet, but because the engine, the transmission, the all-wheel drive system, and almost everything else about the vehicle is very similar to the Crosstrek, it's likely that you won't have a problem having it serviced locally. When creating the plug-in hybrid version of the Crosstrek, they decided to make it a range topping model, so it is going to be more expensive than the non-hybrid limited trim, which is the closest you could get in the regular Crosstrek lineup. That non-hybrid model starts at $27,195, and if you add all of the options to that particular model, you'll end up at $29,545. That means that the base version of the Crosstrek plug-in hybrid is going to be about $5,400 more than the top-end trim of the limited. But federal tax credits and state tax credits help soften that blow. The plug-in hybrid qualifies for up to a $4,500 federal tax credit, which gets the delta down to around $1,000. And then California and a number of other states will add an extra $1,500 on top of that if you qualify. That could make the least expensive version of the plug-in hybrid about $500 less expensive than the most expensive version of the non-hybrid, but feature for feature, the hybrid model is going to be about $2,000 more even after all of the applicable tax credits. Before we move on to competition, let's talk a little bit about how it compares to the non-hybrid model. If you qualify for all of the tax credits, then the math actually starts to make a lot of sense. And I would say if you're shopping for that top-end limited trim, you should probably get the plug-in hybrid if it's available. Because even though it's going to be about $2,000 more than the non-hybrid limited trim, we get better acceleration, actually notably better acceleration. We do lose a little bit of cargo capacity in the back, but other than that, the cabin is about the same size. We don't lose any of the all-wheel drive capability that the Crosstrek is known for as well. And even though the regular Crosstrek is very fuel efficiency still increases. And even if you drove the Crosstrek plug-in hybrid as a regular hybrid, never plugging it in, you should save about $450 at today's relatively low fuel prices. That's $450 per year, yielding a payback time of about 4.5 years or so, depending on your driving cycle. Now, obviously, that will depend on your ability to charge and, of course, the route that you take home and to the office, because, as I said, when you get going over about 64 miles an hour or so, it will drop out of EV mode. It'll still be using electricity to help improve overall fuel economy, but it won't be in EV mode. With that out of the way, let's dive right into the options. First thing to know when it comes to options is that there really aren't very many vehicles like the Crosstrek plug-in out there. Many of our followers over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos thought that the most direct competitor to the Crosstrek is actually the RAV4 hybrid. At $27,700, the RAV4 Hybrid is about $2,800 less than the Subaru, but it's in a different category. It actually is a step larger, so some might say that's an even better deal versus the Crosstrek, but remember, it's not a plug-in vehicle and it doesn't have a mechanical all-wheel drive system. Now, Toyota has really improved the overall programming of the all-wheel drive system in the RAV4 Hybrid, allowing it to send a little bit more power to the rear axle than the previous version and really improving the overall traction management. So it means that it is definitely a little bit more off-road capable and a little bit more snow capable than the previous RAV4, but it's never going to behave in those situations like the mechanical all-wheel drive system we find in the Crosstrek plug-in or actually the non-hybrid RAV4 as well. It's really noticeable when you take the vehicle off the beaten path that it's not able to send as much power to the rear axle, and you get a lot of front wheel slip before it actually starts to send more power to the rear. Likely because of the lack of mechanical all-wheel drive system, the RAV4e all-wheel drive gets 40 miles per gallon combined, so it is more efficient than the Crosstrek, but again, there are those trade-offs there. We also have slightly less ground clearance in the RAV4, 8.1 inches versus 8.7 in the Crosstrek, and because of the overall size of the vehicle, it's not going to fit in quite as many places as the Crosstrek would. The next most logical competitor is the Niro plug-in hybrid. Now, some might say that the Niro is not really a crossover, some might say it is more of a hatchback. Whatever you want to call the Niro, it's a plug-in vehicle and it's in a similar price point to the Crosstrek. The base price is a little bit lower at $27,900. We then have a mid-level trim at $31,500 that gives us most of the features that we find in the Crosstrek plug-in. And then we have a top model at $34,500 that actually gives us a few features we don't find in the Subaru, like ventilated seats. When it comes to overall efficiency, the Niro is notably more efficient than the Crosstrek. The big omission with the Niro is that all-wheel drive is not available at all. So if you want all-wheel drive in your plug-in vehicle, just cross the Niro right off your shopping list. But if you want the best fuel economy, you're definitely going to find that in this particular model. Next up, we have the only other all-wheel drive plug-in hybrid vehicle in sort of this general price category, although it does go up to $42,000, the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid vehicle. To be honest, I was disappointed the last time we drove the Outlander plug-in hybrid. Overall performance and overall efficiency just weren't where I thought they should be. Although the Outlander does a reasonable job of operating as an electric vehicle as long as you're within that 22 miles of range and you don't need maximum acceleration, once you actually turn the gasoline engine on, things start to fall apart a little bit because the fuel economy was definitely not where I thought it should be. At 25 miles per gallon combined when in hybrid mode, that's notably lower than the non-hybrid Crosstrek. So if you're simply looking for better fuel economy, you'll find it in a wide variety of non-hybrid vehicles out there. Now, it does have an electric all-wheel drive system that gives us equal power up front and out back for reasonable off-road performance, but the overall efficiency of the Outlander plug-in hybrid is definitely very low. The Outlander is larger, so if you definitely need that extra room in the back, this is going to be really the only option in the plug-in hybrid segment. But again, I would remind you that in terms of overall cost of operation, overall efficiency, etc., you're going to be better off getting any of the other plug-in hybrid vehicles out there, really. Next up, we have Mini's plug-in hybrid offering, which starts at $36,900. That's kind of a deceptively low price tag because by the time you add options to it, a lot of people love to option and custom configure their Mini, you could get up to significantly higher price points than we find in the Subaru. The Mini plug-in hybrid system is definitely a mild hybrid system as well. We only get 12 miles of range, so if you thought the overall EV range in the Crosstrek was low, wait till you get in the Mini. But on the flip side, we get more power when everything is operating together, 221 horsepower in that model. Mini is sort of treating their plug-in hybrid vehicle as a way to shift some of your costs over to electricity, but not too much of it, and then a way to improve overall performance, because that is actually the fastest version of that vehicle at the moment. The design of the Mini hybrid system is also a little bit interesting. We have a separate electric motor in the back, very much like we see in the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, and then we have a motor up front as well, and everything works in coordination with one another. The downside to this design is that the vehicle cannot send as much power to the rear axle as you can in something like the Crosstrek. So the all-wheel drive system limitations are going to be very, very similar to what we see in the RAV4 hybrid. Bottom lining Subaru's plug-in is actually pretty easy for me. I would say if you're shopping for the limited trim and you live in one of the states where the plug-in hybrid is sold, you should just get the plug-in hybrid unless you really can't live without your spare tire. Now, I realize that it sounds a little bit silly to have an off-road capable vehicle without a spare tire, but you could add one yourself aftermarket. You could put it in the trunk, you could put it on the roof, wherever you want to put it. That's probably what I would do, because if you're going off-road, you could take it with you, and if you're not going off-road, you do have the improved overall efficiency and the improved overall cost of operation versus the non-hybrid model. I also actually like the interior tweaks in the plug-in hybrid and the blue paint scheme that our particular model came in. So if I was shopping for a Crosstrek, this is definitely the model that I would get. Again, there are some downsides, however. There's that lack of the spare tire, there's the reduced cargo area, and there's the fact that I think the battery could have been packaged a little bit more sensibly somewhere either else in the vehicle or in the spare tire well, somehow jammed down in there so that way you could have a little bit more cargo room. But to a large extent, those gripes are balanced out by the improved economy, the improved performance, and the lowered cost of operation that we find in the Crosstrek PHEV. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. If you were shopping for a Crosstrek, would you get the plug-in hybrid model? And if you were shopping for any of the alternatives that I've discussed, would you get any of them over the Crosstrek plug-in hybrid? I'm especially interested in what you think about the upcoming RAV4 hybrid. In the meantime, be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what I'm driving this week, and click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel. I'll see you next week.